Our speaker today is Jeremy Hill. Today's topic is titled Impact of Two Black Swans on the Wichita and Kansas Economies in 2020. Welcome, Jeremy. You're on, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. To provide some interaction, let me go over here. I've got a couple questions that I'll submit out to the group, and I want you to go ahead and type this in at the very top of here. If you put it on your browser or on your phone, each question will automatically pop up on your phone. So you can type in polleverywhere.com. The only thing it ever asks you is you can put any name you want. It doesn't really matter because we won't even show up here. This is a word cloud. As you think about the things that you are concerned, the biggest concerns for 2020, it will start building up. So go ahead and open your phones, emails, things like that, and start putting it on here. The reason why I'm going to have some of these interactive questions is because as we're trying to forecast the economy or even measure the impact of this has been so quick and so abrupt to our economy that there is lacking of real data and information. I'll show you what we have as we go forward, but a lot of the information is still difficult to really grasp to understand what the depth is or what the trajectory will be. I'll give you another minute or so. Maybe people are just trying this out. Bankruptcies, and actually I'm going to come back to a bankruptcies kind of conversation, and you can put more than one. Lots of inflation. Well, that's really good. I can try to come back to that. And you can put more than one, I think. Yes, incentives. That's good. Actually, this is good. I will try to tailor some of these comments on here. If you put a couple more, I'll try to highlight some of this in a little bit more detail. You're welcome to keep putting stuff on there. I will come back to that in a second. All right. So discussion, I'm going to talk about prior to this bump in the road, the trends prior to the coronavirus. And that's important because one of the things we get to remember, and normally when we go into recession, and although we're not officially recession, it's pretty obviously that we're in a recession, it's usually an economic bubble. Something gets out of line and the economy has to recorrect itself. Well, this is not like that. In this case, this is a natural disaster that's shifting our economy. So we need to talk about the underlying economic conditions and where we're going. When I say take inventories, that data, what data do we really have out there to put as a benchmarks to give us some direction? Talk about the impact and the catastrophe of this coronavirus, and then a road to recovery. All right, prior to this bump in the road, I put up employment for Kansas, but I can also talk about the employment for Wichita. And you'll see the last recession bar. We saw that we came up to the Great Recession. Kansas and Wichita were both late to the game and really started declining later. Wichita struggled several years after. And then we see this increase in employment all the way into 2015 to 2016. Most people were shocked when I said in 2017, I thought the economy was slowing down. I got a lot of flack about that here in the Wichita area, saying I thought this economy was slowing down. And Wichita is more pronounced than this because it was really in the Wichita area that caused the slowdown. And then we had this growth again. If you look at even Wichita, we see a little bit more of an acceleration of growth over recent months. I show this because we were growing and we were seeing a lot of growth behind that. And I think even the context of that growth was optimistic. On the other side, there's two stories. You have this retail sales, which is different than what was going on in the nation. You see this growth in retail sales, and then as the nation just continues to grow, we started going down. A lot of that had to do with political uncertainty. It had to do some industries that were struggling. We had shifts in household income to more middle and lower income, and we lost some of the higher income earners. So that some of the consumption is gone. But in the last year, we saw retail sales coming up. Wages were coming up. So when you think employment was improving, wages were improving, I was becoming a lot more optimistic about the Kansas economy and the Wichita economy. So I always try to show you my last forecast just to give a check of how accurate we were doing. And then last October, we said, yes, there are reasons to think that we should have growth, even within this tight labor market conditions that we had at that point in time, but we thought the economy was going to grow. Then we hit what we call a black swan. And in forecasting, a black swan is supposed to be a highly unusual event. not very common, and something you don't normally pull into your forecasts. And the reason why is because I could give you lots of them, right? We could have a war, or we could have cyber terrorism, or we could have, and I get a long list of issues that really could be these black swans that could deviate the economy. We need to recognize them, but we don't usually include them. Our first black swan event was a 737 MAX. Definitely a risk to the economy. It shaved off about 0.2% of the Kansas economy. And this is what is our forecast in January. We went from a growing economy to the Wichita area to a declining in 2020, just from the 737 MAX. This also assumes a full production coming back in July, which obviously we're already off of that one. So then we hit our second black swan event. And this is what I'll spend most of the time on the coronavirus. So we need to take inventory. What data is out there that helps us really understand what's going on? What I'm showing here is this unemployment. This is continued unemployment claims at the state level. And to do that, you have to be laid off and you have to go and file. Now, this doesn't include everyone. There are some people that don't file. It also includes some people, it might overcount a little bit as well, but this gives an indication. And you can see this continued claims at the state level. We're already at 110,000. This is as of earlier this week for last week's numbers. When you look across the state, and this is only for a 1 week period right here, and you can see Sedgwick County is on the top of the whole state on unemployment claims. You see Johnson County around 15, 16,000. If I back this up just a few weeks, you can see that Sedgwick County was one of the first ones, and we started having a lot more unemployment claims before the rest of the state. Now, we should put this in context. I mean, I can tell you unemployment, we can look at unemployment numbers, but to keep this in context, I'm showing you unemployment claims for the US over a longer history. Here's all these recessions back all the 1970. You might remember the energy crisis. Several people on this call might remember that, thinking it was a bad time. And you can see unemployment claims came up. Then you look at the dot-com bubble era, didn't really affect employment too much. You get to the Great Recession, which at that point we were thinking, oh my goodness, this is some pretty big layoff numbers, but really had a financial crisis. It affected the economy in multiple other ways. But this one, the best way to capture what's going on right now is this unemployment claims on the number of people. And you can see we have a huge spike. It's already coming down on these initial unemployment claims. If you look at continue to be even higher. I do this to give a scale of how this is impacting the economy. Now, a big chunk of this is fear that's driven this, and another chunk of this is policy that pulled onto it. Well, actually, I'll stop there and pause. We did look at policies, not only in the Sedgwick County when we did our stay at home, and at the state level, looked at essential and non-essential. And as this group is well aware, when you look at GDP, how we consume the economy, the majority of it, 3/4 of it is consumption, right? When I looked at the essential and non-essential businesses, and essential and non-essential by retail sales, we see that the majority of the market really wasn't shut down for the consumption side of things. And when we looked at the employment associated to the sectors, it really were those that were essential. They actually had most of them had jobs that required them to be public facing and had to be in the public to do their job. Those that are non-essential tended to not have to be in the public, so that means they could work from home and didn't. Now, there are definitely gaps on both sides where people were considered essential or non-essential that created massive disruptions. But it was really fear, as we looked at it in the very beginning stage, fear is what sucked out the demand in the economy more than anything else. Here's initial unemployment claims. The other one I showed you has continued, and you can see that we peaked and has been coming down. Before we think this is great news, and I know a lot of people thinking this is really good news, I'm actually not too optimistic about this. As I'll talk about in a minute, I think we're going to see unemployment claims, initial ones, come back up here in a few weeks and months. Here's an initial, these claims just for May 9th, and you can see by sector. If I back this up to all the way back in at the beginning of the coronavirus, you see manual service sectors being hit first, right? Restaurants, right? Getting your hair cut, places like that, retail, and then Wichita and Kansas started coming up on manufacturing. Now, we put this in context, right? If you think about why did we have manufacturing so high so early, it's because of the double swan event, right? Our aerospace companies had already worked off a lot of their working capital, right? They were already pretty tight, trying to be very lean, so they kept the supply chain healthy. And then you had the second event. That was the tipping point of, well, we need to go to furloughs and we need some, not the major companies, but the supply chain already went straight to layoffs pretty quickly because they didn't have the capital available to do it. Now, one thing that I've been pretty systematic about every time I talk about this is it's important to say that what happened in manufacturing here earlier, it clearly was a double swan event for us that really was unique. But I think manufacturing in that durable sector across the state and across the nation, you're going to start seeing those rise over the next month or two. And so misery likes company, and I think the other manufacturing is going to feel it as well. Now, as we move forward, there's going to be all kinds of shifts between these initial unemployment claims, right? We're already seeing a combination of food service because of policy, they're coming back. Healthcare was closer to the top. Some people are surprised by that. But really, a lot of the healthcare was impacted by this essential and non-essential. What we're going to find out is healthcare, as people lose all that income over the last several weeks and months, they're going to start struggling on people going out and getting basic routines procedures, and so we'll still see some layoffs there. Demand has shifted. All retail is one that I think is going to be permanently a structural shift in that segment and is going to disappear in the future. Construction is about to really get hit. A lot of the construction was already bidded off. They are awarded projects in not only the commercial side or the residential side, but you get to the third quarter and fourth quarter, and even in the first quarter of next year, that's when construction is going to really start wearing out, and they're going to see a lot more unemployment claims there. I won't go in all of them, but give you a flavor of what I'm thinking about. All right, you can look at the same phone or website that you're on, and you can fill out this next question. The conversation here, and I want to get your feedback. So we have manufacturing. They did furloughs early, the bigger companies. The question is, what is your thoughts on the likelihood that they're going to lay off over the next 2 months, right? They worked off this liability called these benefits for sick time and for vacation. Are they going to start laying off, or are they going to be able to hold on to them? So far, we have one person on there saying that we strongly agree to the statement that we'll see more layoffs there. And I like disagreement. So whatever you think, if you disagree with it, please definitely put it in there. I definitely want lots of perspectives. So far, we have agreed and strongly agree to this. Well, I'm on the side of strongly agree, as I guess I kind of shared earlier in this. I think that they're working off benefits, and there's some unique aspects to aerospace that we have to consider, right? The larger companies have to balance not only what's going on at Spirit and Textron, but they have to balance the weakness within the supply chain. And that supply chain, even if I back up 5 years ago, I've had conversations about supply chain risk issues and access to capital. In some cases, there's lots of access to capital. In some cases, there are just issues of delivering because of labor. But you see all that risks and the vulnerability within it. I think a lot of those furloughs are going to start turning into more layoffs. But it's good to see some other feedback on that. All right, the coronavirus catastrophe. We started with an impact, right? Numbers are not available because I did this a month ago. Actually, I started more than a month ago. We didn't have employment. Even unemployment claims were not even close to being of value to us. So I looked at the 500 sectors, looked at national data, and I went through and said, okay, here's how I think this is going to impact all 500 sectors. There's production issues. There's supply and demand, supply chain issues. Remember, we've shut down ports in some cases. Some sectors are really impacted. Decreased spending from households. Decreased productivity because people are non-essential trying to work from home when they're not being productive. Decreased demand. I even have increased demand on some sectors like the Walmarts of the world. We did it by industry. We looked at it by households. We even allowed the different regions to interact with each other. So The tourism sector in Kansas City impacts the state through tax dollars. We have all this state and federal funding going through Topeka, impacting the rest of the state, and the aerospace and our supply chain, all interacting with each other. And then I added in the stimulus relief. I don't have all the rounds now because we've had additional rounds of stimulus funds. I will say, and this group will probably appreciate it, when I looked at the amount of output lost and how much spending would be created, how much output would be created from stimulus, in a 3-month period, it was only about half of the funds that were injected into the Kansas or these economies really created output to increase in a 3-month period. You see some of the direct benefits more in the unemployment claims they're more immediate, although there were some issues with that. The payroll protection program does not it actually created a bottleneck within the model, right? When demand was gone, you prop them up, they're really not being productive, right? Demand has shifted. And so the model said, not in the short run, they're just going to hold on to cash and there's not really hold on to some labor, but they're not being as productive. And that created some problems within the model. All right, our impact. We think in this 3-month period, and again, I did this a month ago, we thought we'd see Kansas declining on the employment side, not unemployment, on the employment side by 27%. Output, that's the value of what we're producing, 27%. The biggest region that's impacted is Wichita. A lot of that has to do with aerospace and issues there. We also have the biggest loss in output of all the other regions. Kansas City is the second one, and that's because of the manual service sector influence there. I saw something pop up on my screen, but you see that manual service sector really getting higher. Rest of Kansas, well, let me switch to Topeka. Topeka has losses, but they also get somewhat sheltered because of government. Government really helps the region out. And then the rest of Kansas is getting influenced and beaten by the rest of the state and some of the issues. Note that it didn't include all the in-time issues of outbreaks of the clusters in here. This one's important. I actually have this for Wichita if you want more detail. I have tons of detail on this. The direct impact of coronavirus is the loss of 208,000 jobs. Indirect, this is important. This is the supply chain. We lose these jobs because they were non-essential or because of some other factor, just a fear. And this is the supply chain side that gets impacted, 104,000 jobs. Now, as we have those lost jobs in this 3-month period, we have lost consumption. And that lost consumption gets caught here in this induced side. And this is where I think, although we're reopening up markets, people have lost income, right? When they have this lost income, they can't go out and spend. And I think we're going to get to that almost 400,000 jobs lost in Kansas. Labor income associated with that in a 3-month period, and even the value of goods that we're producing. All right. I'm going to go ahead and skip onto this. Employment impact by share. This shows where we did this impact across the state. And you can see in the Wichita area, manufacturing is the big hit here. In Kansas City, you get down here into the finance and administrative, some of that support sectors, even in real estate, that gets impacted more. And then you go to Western Kansas or rest of the state, and you get down to the food accommodations, which is mostly because of the essential side. The other sides of their manufacturing was still trying to produce at least. Here's a summary slide, which I won't belabor on it, but you can see the impact by different regions. Largest decline in percentage is Wichita, but largest decline in employment is Kansas City. And then you can see the rest of the state. I will share these slides, by the way, if someone's going to ask. I'd be happy to share them. This is a visualization of the impact. You can see how much we declined compared to the Great Recession. We're talking about a lot deeper impacts. This is annualized versus that 35%. And then you see Topeka and Wichita, or Topeka and rest of Kansas having less of an impact. Right. This gets us to where we're at now. The road to recovery. What might we expect going forward? And I want to remind you that this is not like an economic bubble. In economic bubbles, you have corrections, right? The market gets out of whack, you have corrections, and you can go forward. But that's not the case here. The case here is we have a natural disaster, and it's not even a natural disaster like Katrina did, right? In Katrina, you can put more construction and people start moving back. But this impacted the whole U.S., the whole global economy, And the only solution, which is this big shadow over the economy, is when we have a vaccine or some other fear is reduced from the economy. Once you reduce fear and you have a vaccine, which is a great way to reduce that fear, you have control over governments and the fear of what might happen there, then the economy will come back. And so without that, we have the shadow of this hanging over the economy, and we will not have a full recovery until that fear and is mitigated. Someone earlier about bankruptcies. Here's another question for you to pull up on your phone and website. Access to working capital will become a widespread issue in the third quarter. Agree, neutral, disagree. I didn't put variations in here. There are already some issues of working capital and access to income. Definitely we've been injecting lots of cash into companies to help them with working capital. There are the solvency of the banks are still there, but there's definitely lots of risks out there. The question is, what will happen to the bankruptcy after you get through working through your working capital? Most businesses have 3 months of working capital. I looked at some national averages. They have 3 months of working capital, right? If they're a solid business. You get down to other businesses and other industries, they have a lot less of working capital available to really work with. So you have some variations. All right. Here's our updated forecast of employment. Now, I'm not going to show all of our forecasts. We do it for value of permits, for construction and retail and sales and all kinds of wages. This gives you a perspective. We took the impact, added it to our econometric model and said, let's let the model understand the interaction with the U.S. economy, within each economies, what does it expect? And you can see the first quarter is obvious. We have the decline. A lot of it's happened, although I think more is to happen here in the Kansas economy. We get this bump up back from this reopening the market, some pent-up demand, right? Think about the more affluent households have not been impacted. They've had some cash on hand, ready to spend. So they're probably going to have some of that bump up in the economy. But you can see that this makes it look pretty smooth, in my opinion, but I think it's going to be much bumpier than this. When people talk about, is this going to be a U-shape recovery, a V-shape? Please don't look at this, although this looks kind of like a V-shape. I'm not showing a V-shaped recovery. I think it's going to be a W with lots of ups and downs, where I think we're going to come down. We're coming back up because the market's opening up, but I think we're going to find that demand out there is not where we expect it. A restaurant might open up and say that, well, fear is still there. I hired everyone back. Now I only need 80% of my staff. And you go over to another sector like accounting, where they say, hey, we kept them. They were non-essential. They kept working from home because they could. Now we find that demand is less, and there's going to be having to do some layoffs in something like an accounting services, or you have layoffs in some other sectors. And so I think we're going to have some ups and downs, particularly that manufacturing is going to be a real struggle in durable goods. I think in that side, you're going to say we need global economy to improve. We need overall investments to improve. You need a lot more to improve before we have durable manufacturing to come back. On aerospace, since we're an aerospace town, you also have to have the corporations have to improve significantly on corporate profits before you're going to see some improvements there. Although there's some weird shifts within aerospace. Travel demand is also another factor in the aerospace one. All right, you'll go over Wichita is much more extreme, and you can see that same slow recovery to the fourth quarter. If I put in Topeka and Kansas City, you see different kinds of rebounds. Kansas City has a little bit more of a rebound than both of them because they're going to see a little bit of a jump up into it. And then the recovery for like Topeka is going to last longer. Here's our forecast by sector for the state economy. Now, although you saw that I had just 380,000 jobs lost in that 3-month period, we're showing when you annualize it for the whole 12 months, we're showing a loss of 144, right? We're coming back. That showed visually in that previous one with a total decline of around 10% in total employment. The sectors being impacted the most, and you hear me talking a lot about this durable goods, and then leisure. I think leisure is going to stick around for a while. People are going to have the paradox of thrift. As you have fear about what's going on, even if you have pent-up demand, you have segments, the less affluent households, who are going to be fearful of their jobs, either coming back or they might lose it. I think they're going to be thrifty, they're not going to spend, and I think that's where we're going to have a real drag on this part of the economy. Now I'm flipping over to the Wichita, and you can see an even larger decline in that durable goods, around 28% annualized. And then you have even a bigger impact. The reason why is the model sees the relationship of aerospace wages, a lot of that higher affluent income, which is not being impacted as much on the state level or national level, but their loss in wages really sticking around in this economy and making it a little bit harder to recover. All right, Wichita employment will reach its previous peak by when? This is a question for you guys. The first half of 2021, the second half, we're going to go into 2022, we're going to go to beyond. Now, I didn't give you the option of this year, but you could, maybe I should have put that in there. Some people are thinking, but not very many, think that we might have a rebound this year, but I don't see that really coming. So far, we're seeing really long term. And by previous peak, we're really talking about for Wichita was that February. That's clearly going to be our previous peak. February was a good month for us, our highest. We're just now coming back to our previous one than that, which is back in 2008. All right, so we think long term. I am in agreement with everyone on so far that's responded. I think we're going to come back, as is shown on that model, and in 2021, it's going to be a slow growth, and I see that this is going to wear the economy down. We have to find the new supply curve, the new demand curve, where that new equilibrium is going to be, and I don't think that's going to happen in the short run. But we should keep in mind the fundamentals of the global economy, we're growing, and the Wichita economy. So if somehow, and this is just to give an alternative view, if somehow there is a vaccine and fears mitigated, right, we could see the economy be a little bit more robust. That is the case where you see a little bit more robust, not in 2020, but maybe in 2021 somewhere, we can see a little bit more growth. But that means it has to come quicker than other people are forecasting for that to happen. All right. I've made it through some slides pretty quickly, but we have lots of time for questions, so start getting your questions ready. And I can go a whole lot more, even, and just to tease out some questions if you're thinking about it, entrepreneurship or how we might shift in the sectors or occupations, or there's so many more things I could talk about. All right, a couple things. I think we're seeing this turn already, but by Memorial Day, we're definitely going to have a turn in a corner of the losses, the majority of the losses, and start seeing some more upward movement, particularly because a lot of the essential and non-essential business and policies behind it. I put the summer quicksand. I want to warn everyone, we're going to start seeing, I think, a lot of negative news over the summer, and we need to be prepared for it. Doesn't mean it's going to be all bad. Part of it is data collecting up. Part of it is these other issues just wearing down businesses. And so you're going to find that demand is less, and we'll have more layoffs. Bankruptcies are going to start popping up everywhere, I think, just as someone put it up earlier, and credit issues. I think this issue with furloughs are going to start hitting our news, in particular in Wichita, and make it look really negative, in some cases too negative compared to other economies. But just be prepared. I think we're going to have some of that quicksand really slowing us down a little bit over the summer. Overall, I still think we're going to have this second and third quarter bump. Keep in mind, there's a lot of cash in the economy. Although you guys put out this idea of inflation, I don't think there's an inflationary kind of expectation in the short run. Right now, we've got a lot of cash sitting in the economy. The reason why it's not inflationary at this time is because demand is not there. And this is killed demand for quite a while. So I don't think it's inflation right now, but that doesn't mean we don't have costs and other issues down the road. But right now, I don't see this as an inflationary issue. We do have lots of cash out there, and because of that, that's going to be propping up the economy. We're going to have a lot of the cash start spending it off at some point when you work through. So, and the last one is the same thing I've talked about earlier, is the shadow of of this coronavirus really hanging over everything until we get a solution. So at that, I'm going to pause and see if we have questions. And I know, I believe Michael's going to help me a little bit with some of those chats if you emailed it to him or send it on the chat box, which I don't even see on my screen, by the way. I'm going to leave my screen open just in case that we can go back and forward between slides. So Michael, I'll let you help, or Carl, you're going to help with that.
Yeah, I'll stay off screen, but this is Michael. I'll help out with that. But Carl's going to.
Jeremy, we've had an unprecedented expansion in the Fed's balance sheet, and I was interested in your opinion of any second or third order consequences that may come from, and particularly unintended consequences of having the Fed's balance sheet inflated as this involuntary exercise in what I would think the economists would call modern monetary theory, which is the idea we can kind of print our way, albeit electronically, out of our problems with monetary creation by the Fed.
So great point. I did expect a little bit of this conversation. You see that we've done all this other stimulus funding, but we are not really capturing what is happening on this other side of this. And the Federal Reserve has been very quick and has been very unprecedented of what they've done before, right? If you go back to the Great Recession, and you look at what they did for purchasing mortgage-backed securities, right? They took a big leap in a different direction than they've done before. That wasn't in their core toolbox before. And by doing that, they've really expanded their balance sheet in that period of time. And I was one that was not too optimistic about that previously, about how that would affect inflation. And you could see my previous ones. I kept saying I was really concerned about inflation from that, and that really didn't create it. There was other issues that were beyond that didn't push it into that inflationary period. So I'm going to acknowledge that I was wrong on that period. What they're doing now is they have crossing a line that is something that is interesting from an economic point of view. They are now directly lending to Fortune 500 companies. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, right? They're directly lending into some sectors, and they're influencing the market. And in another, forget about the purchasing of mortgage-backed securities in the banking side, right? They're now going directly to these companies and deciding that, and that's not really their core competency. So as Carl Peterjohn was talking about, I don't know if you knew about this part, but that's a line that crosses. You really think the Fed of being completely neutral, of not being influenced by anything, right? They should have that autonomy. And when they start lending directly into it, I think that's going to be more of the issue going forward. There could easily be some unintended consequences from that. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't merit that right now, because I don't know all the financial situations of our Fortune 500 companies and how the economic value might benefit from that. But I will say there could easily be some unintended consequences by directly lending and crossing a boundary that was completely off the books before. Is there another question?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll have one from John Todd.
Yeah, Jeremy, I think all of us agree that the coronavirus, the COVID-19 is real. Some of us wonder if it's as severe as the media and the health officials, bureaucracy claims. The question was the economic crisis, was it created by the coronavirus or is it man-made?
Well, so when I looked at essential and non-essential and looked at where we could consume, because we're a consumption-driven economy, and looking at Kansas and Sedgwick, we left open the opportunity to consume on the core factors. However, consumption declined obviously and pretty dramatically. So how much of which is going to be the driving factor of the policy or the virus itself, that's something that we're too near term to this to really be able to parse out how much is which. But one perspective, when I looked at taxable retail sales, most of what you want to spend on retail, you could have still spent if you wanted to spend. That didn't stop, right? You could have done it, but people's fear got in the way, which is a third option of even keeping their business open, because some shut down anyway on the retail side. That also sucked out of the economy. So it's kind of hard to parse out a little bit more than that right now.
All right. We've got a few questions from the chat, and you just touched on one a little bit. Could you maybe talk a little bit more on the intersection of consumer confidence, inflationary pressures, and really consumer confidence tied to, we're waiting for this vaccine. Is that really what's keeping people from getting out and interacting in the market?
Right. So I've looked at some of the consumer confidence. Obviously, it's dropped. They're very concerned about current conditions. They're concerned about their job and expectations and wages. So the forecast for consumer confidence, I keep putting back to fear, and if that fear is propagated because of media, and that could be part of the conversation that John was trying to get at as well, that the fear is keeping down consumer confidence, and because consumer confidence is down, that's why we're not having the consumption side. So when you go forward, I think I've kind of answered this a few times in here. I think however we define that fear getting out there, that's eliminating consumer confidence. If it's by policy or if it's just by fear of their own risk, that's going to be this cloud on there. It takes policy and leaders to overcome some of that fear, and then it also takes the science community thing to help as well. At some point, and I don't think I've researched the behavioral side of economics enough to really say, okay, how do we measure one over the other at this point in time, saying this is more of a component of fear, or more a component that's driven by media or whatever it might be, or a fear or because of policy that's keeping confidence down. Now, how's this going to come back to inflation? I don't think, we could go the opposite way. Instead of all this inflation because of all this spending, you could also have issues of disinflation, particularly because of demand, right? We could have other issues coming out there because it could be oil and gas, right? And we see a lot of that in our inflationary numbers right now, is they're coming down. So I'm going to stay away a little bit from the inflation right now. I think I don't have much more of an opinion on that than watching more of our regional economy on employment. But I'm gonna pause there. So Michael, do you have another one?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I know we're stretching a little bit outside talking about behavioral economics, so try to cater away from that. So another question this is related to unemployment. Right now, some folks who are currently on unemployment due to provisions in the CARES Act are actually making significantly more than they would have made at their current or at their previous place of employment. When will these unemployment payments end, and what can we expect the economic repercussions to be once these kind of increased payments have subsided?
All right. Well, this is a great question. I looked at this early on because I could not believe the amount of federal stimulus is going to add on to unemployment. We did look at the states and looked at all the measures of how someone can get the maximum of $144, I believe, a week from state benefits of unemployment claims, plus the federal. And then we matched that up to every single occupation in the state. And don't quote me on this, but you can call me. I think it was 78% of the people in Kansas were better off taking unemployment claims than they were working. Now, that created a huge issue. I never did release this to the press, but I was shocked. And I'll be glad to share with anyone on here. We could not believe that it was that much of the economy, that many people in this economy would be better off on unemployment benefits. It definitely sends the mixed message, which I think someone's probably already alluding to, is that if you have so much more of a benefit, why would you, after you've been laid off or even furloughed, why would you be willing or wanting to come back to the labor market? Now, when you look at the guidelines, and I looked at guidelines earlier this week again about the line of you coming back to work or not coming back to work. And I also looked at some national economists that have been looking at this particular issue of how sticky this is going to make for workers re-entering the labor market. And one economist who spent some time on this, but there's not enough data yet, but the indication that he was giving was it was right now only having a very small marginal impact of workers wanting to re-enter. And the reason why is this, and this actually comes back to the previous question, it's about fear. As long as there is fear of consumer confidence and of your job, that you might not, if you don't take this job now, there might not be a job a few months from now after your unemployment benefits run out, you're out. So the fear of this sticking around for a longer period of time is as this economist was thinking, is motivating people right now to re-enter the labor market. The problem with this is we also have, as soon as we get past this policy side, and let's say we do reduce this fear because we have a vaccine, and we say the market starts to improve, then we have the hangover of the policy that would discourage people. And that's where you would have that unintended consequence where people are not going to want to re-enter. They're going to just take the check and know that they're going to have a job at the end. But right now, as long as they don't know there's a job at the end, the risk of taking it is pretty high versus just going back and working. At least that's what another economist thought. So anyway, I thought that's helps answer it a little bit. Next question.
Absolutely. I'm going to read this one verbatim because it comes from somebody who's asking very, very particular, and I want to make sure I get these right. Let's see. So for a long time, many people have been concerned about our local economy's dependence on aviation, so thinking Wichita specifically, based on data like a location quotient from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We haven't made much progress in diversifying with other industries. Should diversification remain a goal, and how can we help achieve that?
Okay. So, there was this push of diversification again, was it 2 years ago? Someone came in town and was talking about diversification. The problem with that notion is that it discounts how the structure of the economy here. And we are very efficient in this region because of the way our whole schools from K through 12 through college, who train up labor, their parents' knowledge, the industry, the institutional knowledge, the physical capital that we have here, the supply chains. If we diversify away from aerospace, then we discount what we actually have the highest value added to our labor. So, people keep talking about we need to diversify. We can diversify, but we should just encourage some of the same aerospace or related sectors that are encouraged there, because that is where we are efficient. That's where we have the most highest value added. When I've seen lots of these interactions of other companies coming in, you could bring another company, but that doesn't make us, when you look at our comparative advantage, where do we look at all this labor and capital and knowledge markets, and you look at all these different things, line them up, we could try to bring another sector in, but we may not be very efficient at doing that. And because we're not very efficient at doing that, the company's not going to have that profit that they need for a long time until we build those systems to make it more successful. So the notion that we should diversify this economy, I think, is just really discounts too much the unique value that we have as an economy here. And it also doesn't recognize that what happened to us recently, that it assumes that what happened over the last 10 years was a bad thing. And I don't necessarily think it's definitely hard on our economy on the employment side. It's been hard on a number of other factors, but the same companies that were more of a mom and pop kind of companies, and I know people are shocked that I would say that to We talk about Cessna, but they were family-owned companies. They handled the way they practiced things before versus the way they handle things now is very different. What happened at the national level was cyclical in economic conditions. What happened here in aerospace was structural. And we're not valuing the big shifts that happened in aerospace that made them much more successful companies. And a successful, healthy company will have longer term value in years to come. So I know this has been a big kick. Everyone wants to diversify the economy, but I think we should value the massive changes that happened in aerospace as a success. Not, although we lost a lot of jobs, I still think it's a success. They're very healthy companies now, other than what's happened. They're structurally healthy companies that can grow and an industry that can grow in the future. I know I'm a small majority on this diversification conversation, but I think we just are not seeing the picture the right way, because I think there's a lot of value in aerospace or value added, because it's value added and related sectors to it, than saying that we need to diversify away to something else, because creating is also a big cost to our economy. Sorry, I went a little probably too long on that response.
No. I appreciate your candor. And, I acknowledge that that's a slightly more majority opinion, and I appreciate you sharing it. Or minority opinion, and I appreciate you sharing it. Our next question is really has to do with the nature of economy, and does our economy depend on spending, consumption, or is it really, we'll go name the other side, is it production based?
Okay, so yes, when I'm assuming this question is more about a regional economy versus national economy. And in that case, I think that was my presentation partly last fall, is I was trying to talk about, we do have consumption just as the US, right? We still consume. The problem with a consumption economy at a regional economy or a state economy is that a lot of it gets leaked out. I mean, I can see the leakages, especially here in Wichita. We can consume all we want, but are we really creating value here when we consume all this? Not really. It gets just completely leaks out through our economy to other economies. So when you start getting down to a smaller economies and what drives it, it comes to more production. So whoever, very astute point, and yes, I completely agree. We're more dependent on that production side. That's what creates the value for this region. That's what creates wages and income.
All right, thank you for addressing that. Our next question is a little bit involved. So one thing that a lot of businesses have learned in our current situation is, surprise, people can work from home and create just as much value or be maybe in some instances more productive. Do you think many companies will turn towards working from home? And if so, which areas of the market might move first? And how will that influence the economy?
So I will say I'm one of them. I was very resistant of letting staff from working from home. And now that I've worked from home, I like working from home, and I'm not sure you're going to get me back into my office. I have less distractions. And so my staff we meet every morning, and they have to be concise when they ask me questions. They can't come up all day long to ask. And for me, the same, reciprocal. I can't just bother them just whenever I want. So I found a lot more productivity by working from home. And we have to think about this. An organization has behaviors and institutional processes. And part of that is how we work with clients, how do we manage projects, and part of that is also previous generations. And previous generations, baby boomers moving out were very personal, transactionary types of values, where they said, well, we need to see the person to make the deal. We need to talk to someone so they can be engaged. I find it very interesting that we have had this whole network to go remotely, and it has been able to handle quite a bit. I mean, we're on Zoom right now. We have an infrastructure that could have done it. We could have done a lot of this sales online and working in this environment a long time ago, but we were resistant until it came to the coronavirus. And this just forced us to change how the institutional knowledge says this is how a sale with a client works, because we just had to do it. So I think there's going to be a massive shift, not only internally to staff, but also externally to working with sales with clients, because all of a sudden we erased, a big segment of what we thought how business should be done. Now it's acceptable to do it this way. You can wear your sweatpants and no one ever needs to know about it, and you'd be more effective. The question is, how does it affect our market going forward? And it's pretty clear. And I will say, I've been saying this for 3 years now. We are way overbuilt in Kansas and Wichita on commercial and retail. We've been way overbuilt. I've kept saying that and saying, if you look at population and income, that we keep building. And I understand why. We've had people are trying to find ways to take their dollars and make an investment on real property instead of the financial markets. And so there was an incentive to do it. But the real catch here is, I think retail is going to be demolished. I don't think we don't need all that retail. And we already had too much retail space across this region that wasn't destroyed because of it. So we're going to have lots of property sitting around there. Same thing with office space. People are going to start working from home because they can be more effective and cost effective for the employer. Why should they need a big office when they can shrink it down and just have meeting spaces? And I think that's going to we just went through a phase of kept building up, and I think that's going to be it's going to take a long time for our economy to come over all that commercial space that we just built.
Awesome.
Did I get at the whole question? Now I went on a little longer.
I think you attacked it pretty well.
Okay.
So thank you for that. And we've got a few more questions, about 7 minutes left until the top of the hour. Let's see. So economic downturns always spur economic opportunities. So it's what's the opportunity in the obstacle? What are your thoughts on opportunities for Wichita specifically, coming off our last question, and maybe Kansas as a whole looking ahead?
So I teased this idea out earlier. The Great Recession was cyclical in nature at the national level. We laid people off. Lead industries went down, and they came right back. They hired almost back the same thing. We had more structural here. Because it was cyclical, and because we had this big shift to larger and larger employers, and those larger employers, when they were trying to find innovation, they were hiring the best people. And when people were laid off in the last recession, they said, hey, I'm going to get the same job back. There's job security. I'm not going to take a risk. So we had so little innovation in the last recession that it was just, people were appalled by it. People were shocked by it. We didn't have the investment. The cash was there. We just didn't do it. The difference between now and then is there's hunger in the belly for us now, right? There are people who've got jobs lost in lower income and higher income here, particularly in Wichita. And that job might not come back. And now you have to feed your family. And so I think the difference here is might see a lot more innovation than we didn't have before. Particularly based on this conversation for the last few minutes, we're seeing the market's changing, right? The market is completely different, right? We need new solutions, new products, new services. So then the question is, where are those niches here? Before I get into where are the niches, let me give you a thought of what industries might go away. And I thought about this earlier on, and I came up with these three, if I need to find them again, 3 things I think you should think about. If there's 2 of these factors, I think, where'd it go? If they're 2 of the factors, then I think the industry is ready for some big change. I got to find it. Oh, yeah. If the industry has really low technology, and if it can be automated, or if there's a national online competition, if you have 2 of those, I think that industry is ripe for lots of changes. Now, there's some low technology that you can't automate or you can't go online because it has to be physically local. They're just not going to go away. But if 2 of those 3 factors are there, I think it's ripe for some opportunity. When we look at the sectors here in Kansas and Wichita, aerospace was mature before this last recession. People like to talk about innovation. It really wasn't being that innovative. We saw profit margins were decreasing. They were holding on to cash. It just needed an injection and lots of changes. That's why you saw structural change in aerospace. There's more to be had, right? I think this is the time for a lot of innovation there. But we're looking at sectors across the state where we were doing, and there's a number of them, and I don't see it in front of me, where I looked at that we're good at in Kansas that are mature, where they've been doing the same thing. Profits have been decreasing. That's why the state's been this not as robust lately, where it was just showing being a mature sector. And a mature sector is always ripe for innovation. The question is, do we have the infrastructure here? Do we have the financial capital available? And do we have the other resources to make those big shifts? And in that case, I think there is. I think the university is trying to play that role here, but it's not just Wichita State. But when you look across the state, there's some other triggers. There's cash available. The affluent families have had this last several months of being thrifty, right? They have cash to invest. The less affluent families, the question is, they might have a good idea, but how do you reach them and get them to the market? If we're successful at doing that, Kansas can come out a little bit better because of the number of sectors that look more mature here, that are more ripe to be innovative. If we don't innovate, then we have a lot of problems. We're going to really lose ground over the next decade. I know you wanted more specific ones, but I can't seem to find it. I did. Someone needs to talk to me later, and I'll tell them more details on it.
And anything that you would like to share later, we can make sure to get up on the Facebook page, and we can connect people there as well. In the last 2 minutes, before handing back to our fearless leader, Carl Peterjohn, last question, try to end on a super high note here. Are there positives that come out of this crisis? And if so, which ones would you expect?
So, I think people are a little bit more resilient than we've given them before, and I think they're going to come out and doing more innovation. And another positive, so we've just been on the innovation. I think they're more resilient to handle that. The second one is, just a few months ago, I was scared to death about what's happening to the 737 MAX and the labor market within Wichita. I thought that event, when it was such a tight labor market, I thought people were going to really just get up and leave, and I was super worried about this. But a positive is that now the whole global economy got flattened. People have to hunker down, and we're going to be able to retain some of that very high, talented, skilled labor that I otherwise thought were going to migrate out. That's one of the biggest effects that deflated our economy, in the Wichita economy, is we lost labor because new product lines went somewhere else, and we weren't able to keep them. And if the new product lines should have started here, we were very efficient at doing it. We just did not have the political power and everything else to keep them going here. So we lost a lot of labor. And because we lost labor, we lost income, we lost all the housing spending, we lost a lot of factors into it. But that's another positive, unusual one that you might think of as a positive. And I imagine, although this is dismal science, and I usually think about the negative side, I'm sure there's a few more. I'm just not coming up with them off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I would love to end a little bit more positive than that, but